It's August 27th, 2016. Hello and welcome. My name is Brian McAvoy.
And I'm Tim Shank. This is episode 8 of Two Cyborgs and a Microphone, brought to you by Twin Cities Plus, creating an intelligent, capable, and resilient community.
Today we're talking about transcranial direct current stimulation, tDCS with a little t. I didn't know anything about these until Tim bought one.
So I picked one up, just a regular tDCS unit from an online vendor, and I found it to be pretty easy and just plugged it right in.
What kind of stuff did you start doing with them?
Well, I started by training cognitive functions just like I do the neurotropics. I went to CambridgeBrainSciences.com. I used their testing to monitor my progress.
And where did you notice some of the biggest improvements? Like, were you able to think faster? Were you able to recall better?
Really, it's across the board. I was training for accelerated learning with the same placement for the electrodes as DARPA uses to train the soldiers. And what I saw in those tests was, I'll describe this to you. When you're taking the tests, there's a pretty fast ramp up to a certain level as you learn to understand the test. And once you understand the test, the ramp in the graphs is a slow increase in the scores of those tests. When I was using tDCS, I saw that ramp increased at a much higher rate than when I hadn't been using the tDCS.
So you had that first initial learning period of figuring out how the game is played or how the test is done, and then you noticed the law of diminishing returns where you get a big chunk of it real quick and understand a bunch of it, but then that last little bit takes the longest. And when you put the tDCS on, you notice a sharp increase in your learning rate.
Exactly.
Cool. So I saw your tDCS. You brought it to one of our meetups, and I started.
Yeah, and then you made one.
I started poking around it, and I was like, I think I see what's in this. And then I made one. I think. Do you remember how much you paid for that?
That was $50.
And then I built it for like $5.
Yeah, I think that just goes to show if you work with electronics and you're willing to do this stuff yourself, how much you can really save. Because tDCS units, especially the adjustable ones, can run, up to the thousands.
The ironic thing is the adjustable one that I made was even cheaper. The parts for the non-adjustable one were simple. It was like 3 parts if you don't include the battery. But the adjustable one had more complex parts, but they were much less expensive, a little bit more difficult to build. I put instructions on how to build one on my blog, and I just put them into an Altoid tin. And there was enough room in there for the battery, all the circuitry, and I just stuck a light on there because why not?
Why not? Did you use your tDCS unit for anything, Brian?
So we're going to get into safety in our next episode. I was not safe when I first started using the tDCS. I thought I was being safe.
How so?
So when you attach the electrodes to your head, and the configuration I was using was my head and my left shoulder. When I started using this, I thought, okay, well, I'm an electrical guy, and I want these electrodes to conduct as well as possible. So you use salt water, a saline solution, whatever you want to call it. And through my electrical knowledge, I went, more salt, more conductive. Throw a bunch of salt in the water, dissolve it, heat it if necessary to get it all dissolved in there. And I got salt burns on my forehead and arm. I still have scars on my left shoulder. My head healed up just fine. Now, this did not affect how it helped my brain, but the whole time I felt this like pinching sensation at my shoulder and head, and I should have gone, there's something wrong, but I didn't. I was not safe, and I have a scar to remember this by.
Well, that's one thing that's real important, is to make sure that connection is solid, but it spreads the current out over a larger area.
Yes, and don't put chemicals there that can erode your skin.
That's a good point. My wife had a similar burn, and I've never been burnt, but I was impressed by how deeply it burned. It was a small burn, and it wasn't anything to worry about, but it was deep. The burn went through the skin.
Yeah. I've still got raised scar tissue there. And, of course, my brain was ramped up as I was doing this. Or, I saw it later on. I was like, wow, I just invented a new way to do scarification that's fairly painless rather than slicing with a razor blade.
You said your placement was on the right forehead. Is that similar to the enhanced learning?
Yeah, it was about an inch above my right temple.
With the anode on your right temple and then the cathode on your left shoulder?
Yep. Yep, and my left shoulder is where I've got the scar tissue.
Yeah, that's what DARPA does.
I think the key issue to take away from this is don't overdo the salt. If you can get a medical saline solution, you're doing super great. It shouldn't even be that expensive. I bet even Amazon should have it. Contact solution, contact cleaner, just the saline solution for that. That might be a good choice.
But if you don't have that, just a pinch of salt. I mean, literally just a pinch is all you need to make that water conductive.
Yeah, and normal tap water has enough impurities that it will be conductive. Interesting little fact, deionized water, like pure water, is a terrible conductor, but as soon as you add a little bit of contaminants, it will become quite conductive. People just assume that water conducts. It doesn't.
Montage is what they're calling the various ways of placing the electrodes for tDCS. So you have different montages for different purposes, and the one that we both have experience with is DARPA's accelerated learning, but there's others. Have you used any of the others?
I haven't. Some of the ones that caught my attention, though, was one that would improve your sense of pitch, like how to be able to pick out music notes. And I'm an awful singer, and that just kind of stuck out to me as something that'd be cool. Like, what if you could, put this on your head and your singing would improve? I don't know. I never tried it, but I just stuck to the accelerated learning one.
Yeah, there's a number of them, and I've never tried anything besides the accelerated learning, but they can be used both to stimulate your brain to be better at something, or it can inhibit something too.
Right. I've heard of people using it to reduce anxiety.
Yeah, I've heard that too, and also pain relief, and I'm looking for it now. Oh yeah, enhancing motor ability and reducing pain. That's another common montage.
As I was building these and thinking about the different montages and what they're capable of, I thought, there's little things I could add to this. Like I could add a module that would take an ordinary tDCS of just the 2 milliamps. 2 milliamps is kind of the magic number. Supposedly it's safe to go higher, but you don't get any added benefit from going higher. So I thought, okay, we'll make a little module that could turn down the amperage. I thought, what if we had one that had a timer? That way you couldn't overdo it. So if you were doing something like reducing stress or anxiety and you fell asleep, you would not want to keep that on. There is kind of a time limit, and I can't remember off the top of my head. Tim, do you remember what the time limit they recommend for this?
I don't. The numbers that stick in my head are 5 minutes is effective, and possibly 20 or 30 minutes is the maximum effective time.
Okay. But you can see the advantage of a timer is you're probably busy doing something. You don't want to have to keep glancing at a stopwatch.
Yeah, and I think one thing that people don't really realize is you feel the electrodes on you because they tingle a little bit, but after you take them off, the effects continue for up to, I think they're up to 24 hours, they say. So just getting that first 5 minutes in is probably all that a person really needs to see the effect.
Now, when you said that, it reminded me, when I first put it on, I saw kind of a bright light flicker. And apparently that's a very common thing because you've got electricity kind of passing through your eye area. And it spooked me at first. And it came with the initial jolt of flicking the machine on. And I also got another common symptom, which was a metallic taste in my mouth. And it was a very definite, I feel like I've just had a bunch of pennies in my mouth. Have you ever witnessed or felt any of those?
Not the pennies in the mouth or the metallic taste, but definitely the flash of light, which is, I think they call that phosphenes. I've definitely seen those, but not the first time. So I'm not sure what the variable is there that would cause that sometimes and not others. But yeah, I definitely have seen the phosphenes.
I've heard just some people get it and some people don't.
Interesting. So why don't we take a minute to I'm on a page on tDCSplacements.com. It just gives you different montages, and I'm just going to go through all of the montages here, and maybe we can visit some of them. So there's one to reduce risk taking. There's of course the DARPA accelerated learning, enhancing motor ability and reducing pain. Those are the ones we've talked about. Oh, and then there's the improving visual audio pitch discrimination. But I'm also seeing some more here. Increasing math ability, which would be great. Improving socialization.
Nice.
improving insightfulness, boosting memorization and learning, and reducing depression.
Wow, it sounds like some of those are on par with stuff that we use prescription drugs for.
Right. And I'm especially interested in the math learning and the improving socialization. That'd be interesting to see. But the improving socialization requires 3 anodes on 3 of the 1020 points. So needs a special setup.
Of course.
Well, there's a lot involved with being a social person.
Yeah, way too much work.
I agree. I agree. The way it works, and Brian, you probably already know this, is any neurons or brain cells under the anode have an increased potential to fire, whereas anything under the negative electrode or cathode has less potential to fire. So when you put the cathode over an area of the brain that is perhaps overstimulated, like with anxiety, then those neurons are less likely to fire. So that could apply to a lot of different conditions.
Yeah, and that's one thing I'd heard about tDCS is depending on the placement, you'll have an increased ability in one thing and a decreased ability in another thing depending on where they're placed. So people have created those montages. So they might have an increased ability in math, but they'll have a decreased ability in language, or so I'm just pulling that out of thin air. So, imagine you could understand calculus really quick, but for the next half hour, you just couldn't talk to people in a glib manner. Or flip it around and you'd be extremely glib and charismatic, but you couldn't figure out a speed limit sign.
Maybe, but one of the things that really turns me on about tDCS, once you dampen the neurons that cause a higher level of anxiety, they should remain less active for some unknown period of time. And that's one thing we should talk about is there's so little research on this. Brian, I think you and I both know somebody who studies this at the U of M, but there's just so little research on this, and there's more and more all the time. Nobody really knows 100% why it works. And when I say that the neurons are potentiated, I'm not exactly sure that that's been validated.
That's what the best research tells us right now is that they're potentiated. And I'm glad you explained how it works because the way I was talking, it was just all magic and pixie dust.
And it does make sense the way it's presented, but like I say, I don't know if anybody's really confirmed that beyond a shadow of a doubt. The one thing that lends it some credibility, though, is DARPA has developed this and is actually using it to train soldiers in pattern recognition, identifying threats from satellites. I read another article where the journalist who wrote the article was learning to shoot in a military installation, learning to shoot a gun. And she went through one pass with regular training with no tDCS and had very questionable results. The second time with the tDCS, she did average for a regular person and didn't even realize that the test was at the highest level by the time she was in. She was imagining that it should get harder from what it was. So that was interesting.
Yeah, it seems like it's a really neat way to crank up your ability to learn for a short period because, as you said, you can't just leave it on or, people would just get these like permanently implanted. The normal units, they're not too bulky. You can hide them inside of a hat, like a driver's cap. But they're not something you're going to want to wear all day. And wearing them too long can give you a headache.
Have you seen the videos or the pictures of people with the DARPA setup?
I think I just saw one stock image.
Because they have something that's a compound electrode of some kind. I'm wondering if you know what that is and how to build it.
I don't know. My best guess would just be a splitter. Or they might have multiple sources of 2 milliamps and maybe one common on the other side. But I don't know, and I'm not going to build it until I know.
They had 6 different electrodes kind of arranged in a hexagon, and I think maybe a 7th in the center. But I thought that whatever they're using to train their soldiers, they must have tested it out, and I want to try that.
And I think I even saw a 3D printable 1020 montage aligner.
Well, that's interesting. I'd like to try that. I'd like to take an EEG cap. You could experiment with different montages that change on the fly. So you could alternate between 2 different montages at a fast rate. And I'm wondering if that maybe would have a different effect.
That'd be interesting. And I wonder how well you could test. You might have to pulse one off and then do a quick sense and pulse the tDCS back on.
Here's a tDCS montage that I didn't know was out there. improved insight. And again, this is, I'm sure, not tested, so just because I say it's improved insight doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to improve insight. But it has other uses. It lists here savant learning, problem solving, general cognitive enhancement, and it's not the DARPA.
That's kind of a vague term of insight.
And you know how pseudoscience is.
Well, all we have to do is reproduce it and write it down, then it's real science.
All right, well, I think that's about all we have time for, Brian, but you did mention that you had instructions for your tDCS unit out there. How can our listeners find that?
It's at my website, 24hourengineer.com or 24hourengineer.com. Just search for tDCS, you'll find the adjustable one, and you'll find the fixed amperage one.
So that's it for us. Thank you for listening. We'd like to invite all of our listeners to email us at 2xcbmic@twincitiesplus.org.
Our constant thanks to Zach Dolan, who created the awesome cover art for our podcast. He sci-fi cyborged our faces. I'm the one on the left. This is Brian McAvoy.
And this is Tim Shank on the right. Please join us next time and we'll talk about implant coatings and safety.
Engineers' middle names are safety. It's important when you're putting things under the skin or passing electricity through your brain.
You have been listening to Two Cyborgs and a Microphone, brought to you by Twin Cities Plus, creating an intelligent, capable, and resilient community.